Welcome back. New day, new build. I've actually managed to get a commission for a TV cabinet, and hopefully through this you'll be able to see the process and the tools used. So let's get into it. So the customer for this cabinet actually has a few things he wanted to be included. Recycled wood being the main thing. Use as much as possible. So I've got a stockpile of a few pallets, and I've pinched a few from a friend of mine who I always know has a few knocking about. So next thing on the list is Waterfall ends, which at the time sounded great, but I hadn't taken into account the space needed for it. Really gave me a few headaches later on. And lastly, a simple pair of drawers across the width of the unit. But as the build progressed, I wasn't happy that they were going to look right. So after a quick chat and a bit of convincing, he agreed to let me come up with a design. But I wasn't going to share what that design was with him until he came to collect it. So in total about 6 or 7 pallets were broken down to give me enough stock for this cabinet, which meant a lot of cleaning up, creating a straight edge on every piece and cutting everything into stock ready for the glue up. In total I think it was something between 1,000 and 1,500 individual battens cut, so yeah, by the end of this I was pretty sick of seeing them. So in preparation for the glue up, I needed to make sure that every single one of these battens had a nice 90-degree cut, just to make sure that hopefully there wouldn't be any gaps. So here's the issue with agreeing to do waterfall ends. I don't have any workspace long enough, and these boards are going to be a little over 2.5 meters long. My workshop's maybe 4 meters, and it's quite crammed. So I've had to create an extended form just to be able to cope with the width of these first boards. So I found that laying all the battens out here helped me quite a bit. I was able to get as much variation into the boards as I could with the colour, and also I've got 3 different thicknesses running through this. Each of these bundles I've taped up is a single row, and each of the bundles is numbered, so even I don't get confused during the glue up. So with the nail glue and glue at the ready, off we go. I'm only using the nail gun just to keep the battens in place. The nails themselves won't add much structure, but it will help during clamping, keeping everything as flat as possible. I actually hadn't factored in that much wastage for when I have to flatten and clean these surfaces up, so every little bit helps. So I'm only laying down about 6 or 7 rows at a time and then clamping them up. Time wasn't really an issue, and it allowed me a bit of time just to make little corrections here and there along the way. However, with only having limited space to keep them whilst they dried, to get everything glued up took a few weeks. In total there's 3 pairs of long boards and 3 smaller boards also. I can only make them up to 30 centimeters wide, as that's all my thickness it will actually take. Later on I'll need to glue them together to get the desired widths. So sending these boards through the thickness have really started to show the differences in wood grains and the different colours that I'm hoping will show through in the end. The shorter boards here were fairly easy to manage, but these longer boards, especially the 2.5 meter ones, were a real challenge. Feeding them in and then getting to the other end in time before they made their way out. So sod's law, I fitted a new set of blades for this build, and then a nail goes and shows up. Luckily there's been no damage to the boards, but I'll have to have a look and see what condition the blades are in later. Pairing up these boards and gluing them together really started to give me a feel for the overall size of this project. For me, this is the biggest one that I've taken on yet. Really important here to make sure that each of the boards are level to each other. The last thing I really needed was a large step in wood. Luckily everything's worked out fine, and nothing more than a bit of hardened glue to take off by hitting it with a 120 grit sandpaper and a belt sander. I recently picked this up and it really makes short work of all of these sanding needs. So this is the 2.5 meter board, and I'm just taking off the ends to be able to start creating the waterfall. Personally, I'm not a big fan of circular saws. I'd much rather use the table saw. Here, however, I don't have much of a choice. Here I'm setting up a 45-degree cut on the table saw just to allow me to create the first joint for the waterfall. This was definitely one of those check twice, cut once moments. I knew I only had a little bit of spare wood to play with here, so I probably had only 2 chances to get this right on each of the pieces. So for the main joints, I'm going with mortise and tenon here where possible, only really relying on the glue and hopefully a tight fit for the main body of the cabinet. The dividers for the drawers will be screwed underneath just to give it a bit of extra stability. So here's really the first time I've started to assemble the cabinet, and there was quite a bit of assembly, marking up, disassembly, cutting, reassembling going on at this point, but seeing each of the parts slowly come together and fit was a really good feeling. all the parts are cut, shaped, routed and been assembled at least once, so I know they fit together, which moves me on to my least enjoyable job, the sanding. So here everything's really being sanded up to about a 320 grit, with the exception of the top of the cabinet itself, which I've taken all the way up to about 600 grit. I just really wanted to make sure that it was perfect for the next phase, which is the Poly X, which I'm using on this build. So I'm actually using the natural satin finish for this. I've used it a few times now and I've never had a bad experience with it. It's really easy to apply, it brings out the colour really nicely, but don't be like me and leave the garage doors shut when you're using it. It's quite potent stuff. Time to get this cabinet assembled, and sod's law, the sun's come out in the UK and it's the hottest day of the year. Not the best for assembling, as the glue was setting far quicker than I was used to, so panic mode setting in quite early on in the assembly. Fingers crossed that everything's square and the joints were good. Thankfully everything was fine. Really pleased with the first look at the waterfall sides. Everything's lined up as I'd hoped. I've just started to put the drawer runners in, ready for the next round of the build, the drawers. So back to preparing wood yet again. Luckily this time I wanted to keep the drawers a little more rugged, so I've only taken off the ends, not cutting out the nail holes or the knots. I think they showed a little bit of the life of the wood that it's had in the past. The finish from the thicknesser was good enough for what I wanted here, so I didn't really have to send any of the pieces. Everything's getting cut to size. I'm actually setting the base of the drawers into each of the sides and then securing them with some wood glue and some screws. I just really want to make sure that they don't come apart after a few uses, and the screws will actually be hidden by the drawer fronts, which I'm making next. Seen the pattern I'm going to use recently, and I wanted to use it on this drawer front. It gave me a chance to use epoxy again, something which I've used occasionally but not had a lot of experience with, so it was good to try out on this build. The table saw was set to 60 degrees and I've made a little jig here just to get a consistent cut on these small pieces of wood. So cutting out a few of these blanks here, each one of them will actually give me 15 small slices that I'll be using on the drawer fronts. time for more gluing. This was a really time-consuming, repetitive task, so plenty of coffee here, plenty of frustration, and I ended up having to make just over 250 of these little V things. Hopefully the overall effect will be worth it. So when I started to lay these out, I was using some little spacers, but I wanted a fairly unique build. I wanted something that wasn't 100% perfect, so little variation in the spacing I thought gave it a little bit of character, and I know this is something that the customer really was looking for. The main reason he commissioned this is because he wanted something unique and something that wouldn't be reproduced. Not using the spacers throughout this. I ended up just eyeballing and double checking the spaces occasionally. Everything seemed to look good, so after it's all dried, I've cleaned up the edges and moved to adding the border. Luckily I found some of this lovely dark brown wood actually in the corner of the workshop, so it's allowed me to maintain the recycled part of the brief, using it to create a handle which I will router out later on, and the edging for each of the drawers. After everything's dried out, a quick fit check, everything looks good, so it was time to move on to the epoxy. I've chosen to use black here just to try and make the natural colour of the wood stand out a little bit. We actually seem to be having a bit of a nice heat wave in the UK when I was making this, so the drying time was reduced a bit, so within a day it was hard, and within 2 days it was ready for machining and cleaning up. So a couple of passes through the thicknesser for each of these boards just to reduce the initial sanding time, and I've cleaned up any of the last bits of epoxy that were left with a 320 and then a 600 grit sandpaper. What I've tried to show here is kind of a post sanding and one before it was sanded. So I'm just holding these drawer fronts in place quickly and making sure the spacing around the drawer is right. The drawer fronts are actually being held in place with about 8 screws just to make sure that they're not moving away from the drawer themselves. Slide the drawers into place and stand back, enjoy a well-earned coffee and admire what I think is starting to be an awesome looking cabinet. Really pleased with how this is turning out. just leaves one final job, giving these drawer fronts a few coats of the Pallet, just to really get those colours of the wood and the epoxy to really stand out. Enjoy. And as always, thanks for watching. I'd love to hear any comments you have. Please leave them below. Also, don't forget to subscribe for my next videos, which will be coming up very soon.